because I was a little girl that grew up where there wasn't any role models, and you couldn't aspire to work as a professional athlete as a coach.
In my family, I've probably achieved the most out of us 4 siblings, and then I look at what the boys get and what they're doing, and I'm like, oh, that's so annoying.
Have a look at that. The 3 Aussie ladies, Eloise, Wellings, Madeline Hills and Celia Sullivan, just waiting for Lineo Chaka of Lesotho to finish, more than 5 minutes behind the winner.
It just showed, I guess, the influence that we have as sports people and the power of humanity and the power of vulnerability, I guess, as well.
It's one of the areas that we're actually trying to grapple with right now, and what's the right path for talented young players. We'd be foolish to think that a talented young player is going to turn down significant sums of money.
Welcome to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia. Our mission is to protect the integrity of sport and the health and welfare of those who participate in Australian sport.
Hello and welcome to Sport Integrity Australia's podcast Onside. I'm Tim Gavel. In this episode, we look at women in sport, featuring an interview with the legendary Heather McKay, a champion in 4 different sports. There's a segment on sportsmanship as we relive a special moment from the Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast. And we speak to baseball's Michael Crooks on the way forward for sport. As discussed in our first episode, Sport Integrity Australia would like to remind athletes about changes to the regulation of sports supplements. Introduced by the Therapeutic Goods Administration from the 30th of November 2020, in order for sports supplements with therapeutic claims containing high-risk ingredients to be advertised and supplied, they must also meet legislative requirements that ensure the safety, quality and efficacy for medicines, including advertising. Sport Integrity Australia has launched our secondary schools resource kit designed to provide teachers with the essential tools related to sport and integrity. The resources fit within the year 9 to 12 units that cover integrity, ethics and anti-doping topics and the nutritional needs of athletes. If you'd like more details, simply head to the Sport Integrity Australia website. Now to the progression made by Australia when it comes to women in sport.
And with that, a magical moment in Australian sport has been achieved by one of our greatest sporting teams. The Australian women's cricket team win their 5th T20 World Cup title in front of a magical crowd at the MCG. Congratulations, Australia, the 2020 ICC T20 World Cup champions!
The 2020 Women's T20 World Cup final at the MCG earlier this year was seen as a watershed in women's sport, but there's still a long way to go before there's parity. In fairness, there has been significant progression in many sports. Carrie Graf is regarded as one of Australia's greatest ever basketball coaches, winning 7 titles in the WNBL. Carrie also coached the Opals to bronze at the 2012 London Olympic Games. She was also the first Australian female head coach in the WNBA in America. These days, Carrie Graf is the Director of Sport at the University of Canberra. UC owns the licence for the UC Capitals in the WNBL. And Carrie is a leading advocate for equality in sport.
I think there's been a spotlight on women's sport over the last few years, particularly with the inclusion of AFLW, cricket. The Big Bash was huge in Melbourne with 80,000 plus fans. There's certainly been massive movement forward, but I still think there's a massive ways to go. You look around the country, and I think out of about 100 CEOs of national sporting organisations, there's 4 women. In the high performance coaching area, the numbers haven't shifted hugely at all, and there's still a massive gender pay gap in women's sport, and I think the needle hasn't shifted on some of those things. Yes, there's been some great movement in, there's now AFL, like I said, AFLW, there's Super Rugby for women, there's NRLW, so there's we've got more competitions for women to compete in, but that's just the start of it. They're new competitions where some of them, the salaries are pretty low if there is salaries, and there still isn't big television deals for women's sport, and I think that'll be one of the next big shifts. When do broadcasters, not just support but put women's sport on television and pay for it and back it and know that, people will tune in and watch, people will pay to watch women play sport on television.
So what needs to happen to force change?
We still need a shift in the decisions around who's going to support financially women's sport, and also how people value a return on investment. Is it just commercial, or is there a social element to your return on investment, whether that's through sponsorship or broadcast? And I think a shift in the thinking of what is a return on investment rather than just commercial and eyeballs is something that critically needs to be looked at.
It's been your goal, hasn't it, your dream, to have fully professional women's sport in Australia across all sports?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think because I was a little girl that grew up where there wasn't any role models, and you couldn't aspire to work as a professional athlete as a coach. And I was fortunate to have a professional coaching career for 20 plus years. So I think we're certainly seeing a shift that little girls can look on television and look around the media and go, wow, I could do that for a job, and that is a legitimate job. But I still think there's a long, long way to go.
It's Carrie Graf, regarded by many as one of Australia's greatest ever basketball coaches, winning 7 titles in the WNBL. Keely Froling is one of the key players for the UC Capitals, and Keely is also a member of the Australian 3x3 basketball squad preparing for next year's Olympic Games. How do you judge women's sport at the moment, Keely? You're a professional basketball player in Australia.
Yeah.
Do you feel as though you're closely getting there in terms of fully professional?
Look, I think I have a different perspective because I obviously have 2 brothers that are in the same position in the men's side, and I see what they kind of get and all that sort of thing. So I think we're definitely getting there, and I think some clubs are better than the others. I think we're really lucky at Canberra that we do really push that. But there's, I think, a really long way to go in terms of pay and even just exposure and, changing people's perceptions of wanting to watch us play and getting us on national TV and those sort of things. So I think we're headed in the right direction, but there's still a long way to go.
What needs to change, do you think?
I think firstly is the exposure and getting us consistently on TV and getting things out there. People don't even know about our league. We don't know about us. We don't get that exposure that the men get. So that starts first. I think in Canberra we're lucky that we do get that, but that needs to be a nationwide thing. And I think once we start to get that, then we can build on that a little bit, start to build up sponsors and those sort of things.
Do you sense there is this sense of unfairness? You're doing the same thing that the male players do? Yeah,
for sure. I think, in my family, I've probably achieved the most out of us 4 siblings, and then I look at what the boys get and what they're doing, and I'm like, oh, that's so annoying. But, it is what it is for now, and hopefully we can make that change. But I think it is a little bit of unfairness at the moment with how, we work just as hard, if not harder than them, and aren't rewarded in the same ways. So, yeah.
Championship-winning basketballer Keely Froling, and obviously there is still a long way to go before we reach equality. To see how far we've travelled, though, in this space, let's hear from Heather McKay. Heather is one of Australia's greatest ever sportswomen. Heather won 16 British Open squash titles in a row, only losing 2 games in her entire career. She won selection in the All-Australian women's hockey team twice, was the US Open racquetball title holder 3 times, and won the seniors tennis individual and teams world championship. An incredible career. In her prime as a squash player, Heather played as an amateur.
Because we were amateurs, we played because we enjoyed the game, basically, and kept playing because of that. So we didn't really know any different in those days. But when I started to go to England for the British, that's when it came a little bit harder, because they were very strict on the amateur status in those days. So we had to watch anything. You were not able to be given anything. So it was a bit tough.
Yes, obviously these days very much about professional sport and making a living out of sport. It's almost hard to comprehend when you look at what you were doing back in those days.
Yeah, but I always think that I played in one of the best eras. Yeah. I always think, how can I say it? There was no real pressure, not like it is today. So the pressure was completely different in my day. It was only part-time. I had a full-time job, so it was only part-time. So, I think people, as years went on, the expectations grew. but there was no real pressure. I never got nervous. Today, the pressure is there, the big money's there, so when the money is there, certainly there's going to be a lot of pressure because you've got to perform. Yeah. And that's really the difference between today and in my time. It's their full-time job, so they've got to perform, whereas mine was part-time. If I didn't perform, well, so what?
You rose to prominence in Australia as the leading sportsperson, not just sportswoman. It must have been quite revolutionary back in those days to have a sportswoman. I mean, there was people like, I guess, Raylene Boyle, Dawn Fraser, as prominent sportswomen, but you were named Sports Star of the Year, amongst other things, Australia-wide. Looking back on those days, did you feel like a trailblazer?
Certainly for squash. I don't know particularly about women in sport, but most probably yes, because the more publicity I got, the more publicity it was for women as well. But for squash, definitely, because although it was a huge game, we really didn't get a lot of publicity. Yeah. So for women in squash in those days, it was a good thing that I was able to do what I did. But really and truly, no, Tim, I didn't think that much about it in those days. Yeah. It's only in the latter days that, things have changed when you're getting paid and there's not equal pay, so the women have got to get up there more and stand up for themselves. So I didn't feel I had to do that. Yeah.
Can you understand, I guess, why they're having to do that now?
Oh, definitely, yeah, without a doubt. Yes. Yeah, it's their full-time job, and they're doing the same thing, basically, yeah.
You've been successful in 4 different sports worldwide. Do you think, well, if I was coming through today, how different it would be? Would there be pressure, do you think, just to play one sport?
Oh, I wouldn't have been able to play 4 sports and do what I did in the 4 sports, no. And certainly I couldn't have I don't think you can start at 18 in any sport today and do what I did in squash, starting that late in your life. No, I think to reach the top in those days, because it is so professional, you really do have to make a decision and then decide which sport you're going to do and carry on with that.
Different pressures, aren't there, on sportswomen these days?
Oh yeah, it's just not playing the sport. It's the whole picture. Yeah. Promoting yourself, promoting the sport, promoting it for the young people. So there's a lot more in being a top sports person, male or female, today.
Because in your day it was very much amateur. You had to raise funds to go overseas. You won 16 British Opens in a row, so you had to fund or find the funds to get over there to ensure that you remained an amateur.
Yes, yep, and I also had to take the 2 months or nearly 2 months without pay most of the time. So every time I went to England it cost me money. So it wasn't easy. But, I think when you love something, you make the effort and you go about and you try and do it.
Yeah. You're still playing tennis 4 times a week, socially, still playing competitions. What keeps you going at almost 80 years of age?
I just love sport, I suppose. Anything with a ball, particularly. I like the social aspect of sport. To me, that's always been a big part of sport to me. Squash, very, very social. The tennis I'm playing now is very social. I suppose I still got a little bit of the competitive side of me, but it's just being able to get out there and do it.
Have you had a chance to reflect? Is now the time to reflect on what you've done in your sporting life?
No.
When you go through the photo albums? Or
I don't personally, but if somebody asks me something or tells me something, I think, oh yeah, that was pretty good. I didn't expect to do that. But no, very rarely do I reflect on it. No.
Is that surprising to people? You sort of, because you're not one to promote yourself, are you? You're sort of quite happy just to do what you do?
Yeah. No, I do my own thing, and I don't try and get out there and get any publicity, and never have done. But I'm very proud of what I've done, and if I ever do think about it, I think, I suppose to have done what I've done in the four sports is the biggest thing. Not just what I've done in squash, but because I've done as well in all sports. Yeah, that's most probably what I reflect on more.
What's your favourite sport?
Squash. Squash with tennis. See, tennis was my first sport, so I was very happy to come back to that. But as I said, if I was able to be able to play squash, I really believe I would still be playing master squash.
Not hockey, not racquetball?
No. Hockey, that gave that away a long time. Racquetball, I've never played back here in Australia because when I came back, I was just with the institute. I was too busy. Yeah. And they didn't have when I went to Brisbane, they didn't have the proper sized racquetball courts, which is the big American sized racquetball courts. They were playing a lot of racquetball on the squash courts at that time, and that wasn't for me. So no, I never went back to racquetball when I came back to Australia. But hockey, I played 3 years, and then got too old and too busy.
So, just a chance to recap on your record: 16 British Opens.
First two official, 16 British, first two official World Championships. 3 US pro racquetball, 1 US amateur racquetball, 5 Canadian racquetball, 9 Australian singles seniors championships, and 5 doubles.
This is in tennis?
Tennis, yep. Named in the All-Australian hockey team twice, but never actually played for Australia. I think that's it.
In your tennis, in the tennis?
In the tennis. I've represented Australia 4 times in the World Championships in tennis, seniors tennis. Won an individual singles and was a member of the winning team for the World Winning Teams Championships. Yes.
Not a bad record.
That's it. I forgot about the world.
Heather McKay, and a reflection on a marvellous career. And as she said, these days it would be impossible to achieve what she's achieved in 4 sports. More with Onside in just a moment.
You're listening to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia.
Hello, I'm Tim Gable. Welcome back. Time now for From the Highlight Reel. At the 2018 Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast, one of the highlights wasn't a gold medal winning performance or a world record, it was an act of sportsmanship. The women's 10,000 metres, Lino Chaka of Lesotho finished 5 minutes after the winner and completed the last 3 laps on her own. And waiting for her at the finish line were 3 of her competitors, Australia's Madeline Hills, Eloise Wellings and Celia Sulahorn. And it was deemed to be the defining moment of the Commonwealth Games. And Madeline and Eloise join us today on Onside. Well, firstly, to you, Madeline, are you surprised that it still resonates after all these years? A lot of people still talking about that act of sportsmanship. Are you surprised?
Oh, I'm very surprised. I think the aftermath of that race surprised me and continues to. In the moment, Eloise, Celia and I certainly didn't, think it was something that was going to be captured or that was going to stay in the memory of so many people. And to be honest, the day after, I was almost a bit overwhelmed and a bit uncomfortable with the response. And it's only been in the time that's passed I've realised what impact it did have and how, our performances as individuals, wasn't what was going to be remembered. So, it continues to amaze me, the impact it has, but it's I'm very honoured to be a part of it.
What about you, Eloise? What's your reaction after a few years now since the 2018 Commonwealth Games? Are you surprised that it still resonates?
Yeah, I am. I mean, it was such a spur of the moment thing, and that's something that I guess, was, resonated with the Australian public. And it was, I guess I was overwhelmed by it too. I thought, I was actually a bit worried about how Linnea was going to respond to all the attention about, whether it felt weird for her to have all that attention. But I was really privileged to catch up with her in the village the next day. And the first thing she said to me was, "Thank you for waiting for me." And I got back to my room and let the tears fall because I did not have to finish the race alone. And that really moved me. And I think it was a moment that I guess reminded me that it's not all about winning. And there was so much more than going on in that race than just winning a running race. And, I had big plans for that race and big goals. And I had one of the worst races of my running career on a major stage. And, just seeing Madeline and Celia waiting there and going to join them was a spur of the moment thing. And as I said, we didn't expect all of the attention, but it was certainly a moment that we won't forget.
Well, let's hear the highlight, and as we go back to listen exactly what happened on that day.
5 on the Gold Coast, and sometimes the great moments in sport don't come from the winners, but have a look at that. The 3 Aussie ladies, Eloise, Wellings, Madeline Hills and Celia Sullivan, just waiting for Linnea Chaka of Lesotho to finish, more than 5 minutes behind the winner, Stella Chisang of Uganda. That is what sport is all about, supporting the competitors once you have finished up.
Yes, and I guess, Madeline, you were quoted after the race saying that, "I'd like to think if I had that day there, there'd be somebody standing on the track for me." That's part of it, isn't it? You're supporting somebody and you'd like that reciprocated, I guess, if you were in the same position.
Absolutely. And similar to what Eloise was saying, it was, I think when we reflect on it, you realise how much bigger sport is. It's an individual sport that we do. You sort of go out onto the track and you think you're all alone when you're out there. And in some aspects, I suppose you're out there running by yourself, but you start to see how many people are running along with you. And that includes your own immediate support. Obviously, we realise, and it's such a privilege when you put on the green and gold to know it's Australia as well, but it is also your competitors. And I think it's a good time for us to reflect, but for other people to see too that, you're trying to get the most out of yourself, but also from other people. And we've all had that day. Elsie had it, that day where she didn't get to have the run that she was hoping for, and I had it only a few days later in the 5,000 metres. And I think in that moment, sometimes you can feel very isolated, running around a track 25 times by yourself. When you're having a tough day, you feel very exposed. And so, I'd love to think that there'd be people there, and there absolutely have been people for me, whether it's a training session or a run or, aspects of life that are off the track. So, my time will come where people might wait for me in a similar way. And, it was something that we didn't think about, but, I think it was just really incredible that it was captured the way it was.
Eloise, is it fair to say there is quite a strong bond amongst the distance runners that doesn't probably exist in some of the other fields?
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's this mutual respect of how hard our sport is, and it's not to lower any other sports, but our event, especially distance running, it can be quite a lonely and solitary journey at times. And I think when we all get together in the Australian colours, there's definitely a camaraderie and a mutual respect and a mutual celebration of actually just getting to the starting line. We do a high impact sport, and the injuries, and my injury journey has been quite significant. So I think just getting to the starting line and respecting each other's journey along the way and celebrating each other is, I think it's an important part of performing well as well, as working as a team and cheering each other on.
What was the reaction from the team itself and I guess officials in the aftermath. Was there much of a reaction from inside the Commonwealth Games team?
Do you want to answer that, Matt?
I mean, I think it was just, I think Eloise would have experienced similar to me. I just remember waking up the next morning, probably not having the greatest sleep because I wasn't wrapped in my own performance, and waking up to just countless messages and, things had gone viral on Twitter, the photos and, requests from radio stations, from, for me, small towns and cities around the country that I'd spent time in that, I had a connection with, and just people asking what the motivation behind it was. And in the first day or two, I really couldn't describe it because there wasn't a motivation behind it. I don't think any of us realised there were going to be the cameras that were on us, and we would have thought that the cameras would go to the next event, and we certainly didn't know that it was going to be what it was. So I think we just had a lot of support from the outside community, but I think within the sport, people were similar to us. They didn't think it was that outstanding a moment. It was just us all celebrating each other. So, I think people were very supportive of it, but they didn't think it was anything extraordinary because most of us would do the same for the others.
What about you, Eloise?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, teammates were kind of like, wow, there's quite a lot of attention around this. And we were like, yeah, it's quite surprising. But yeah, I mean, from family and friends at home, they were obviously very proud that we were part of that moment. But as I said, it could have been anyone. And we were just doing what we would always do in any other race. And it just happened that, just so happened that there was a whole lot of cameras and a whole lot of people watching. So, and I mean, it doesn't make it any less overwhelming and less moving that people responded and the public responded like that. And it just showed, I guess, the influence that we have as sports people and the power of humanity and the power of vulnerability, I guess, as well. It takes vulnerability to finish a race like that for the Linneo to, when, things aren't going well, and to run the last 3 laps on her own. As Madeline said, you're very exposed, and it's a vulnerable position to be in. And, so... Yeah. I'm still moved by it, and I'm still surprised by it. There's all these different feelings around it. Yeah.
Can I get from both of you, just before we wind it up, over 2 years on from that moment, where are you both up to now in your running careers?
Well, I'm just coming back from having my second child, Sonny. So he's 10 months old now, and I'm just building up running. Have had a few little hurdles to jump over the last few months of being back, but I'm progressing nicely now, and I'm hoping to qualify for the Tokyo Olympics, whether it be for the 5K or the 10,000 metres on the track. So should things open up hopefully soon, and in terms of the COVID virus settling down and things getting back to a more normal situation, hopefully some races will start, and we can get on with things.
Have you been able to train?
Yeah, I've been able to train. I'm from Sydney, so I've been able to train. I've got a pretty good setup in my garage, and with a treadmill and things like that. So even during like harsh lockdown, I was able to train on the treadmill, and yeah.
What about you, Madeline?
Yeah, similar to Eloise, the last 2 years have been eventful off the track. I haven't created a child in that time, but for me, my challenge in 2019 was to have double hamstring surgery. And that's all progressing really well. And I'd also love to be at Tokyo. Fingers crossed it goes ahead. For me this year, I guess I've put a lot of my energy into working in pharmacy. So I'm a pharmacist, and it's been a very interesting year with COVID and all the pressures and I guess demands put on the healthcare system. So I've really enjoyed being able to focus on that and I guess get my achievement from that, which obviously we weren't able to get this year with everything being cancelled. I was going to say one of my favourite things really about the moment on the Gold Coast was it really gave me the chance to see the impact running can have, but also that will be one of the defining moments of my running career. I think we're so inclined to list off our PBs and our achievements and how many teams we went to. And I've always done that until that moment. And it was really only the next year when I, sat down in recovery with both my legs sliced open that I realised, wow, I really, should appreciate that and should be proud of what we did as a part of that. Because as much as both Elsie and I'd love to be in the next Olympic team, we might not be. And so it's really great for us to be able to have some, special moments that aren't just about our performance.
Yes, really one of the defining moments of the Commonwealth Games, probably one of the defining moments in Australian sport. You look at the Ron Clark incident many years ago, people still talking about that. And I guess that is part of Australian sport. We love these moments, these special moments, and well done to both of you. Thanks very much for joining us on Onside today, Madeline and Eloise, and well done, and all the best for the future. Thanks very much. That's Madeline Hills and Eloise Wellings joining us today on Onside.
Thanks so much. See you later.
Thanks for having us.
Welcome back to Onside. I'm Tim Gavel. We've been joined by Michael Crooks, General Manager, Performance Pathways and Player Development with Baseball Australia. Well, Michael, firstly, welcome to Onside. How has COVID impacted on your sport?
Oh, look, it's been very mixed right across the country. With the timeline in which it first hit Australia, it was certainly at the back end of our summer season. We did lose a number of local competition finals as a result of that. And unfortunately, our key events that normally would occur from March through to pretty much September had to be cancelled. They included all our National Little League events as well as our Women's National Championships. So very disappointing to lose those events. But with the exception of Victoria, we're certainly cranked back up again. And we're playing baseball pretty much business as normal around the majority of the country right now.
Baseball is quite a unique sport in Australia because of its international focus. Very big in Asia, it's huge in America. Does that present a unique challenge, do you think, to baseball in Australia?
Look, being a smaller sport in Australia, there's perennial funding problems that we have, or challenges compared to the bigger sports, and the international success that our bigger partners here in Australia have had. However, we've historically punched above our weight in terms of international performance, and there's been a lot of local support, in particular through Sports Australia over the last 6 months in particular, in what we can do moving forward. The key positive for us being part of such a massive international sport is that we can build very strong relationships with partners overseas, which can provide layers of support that just aren't available for us here in Australia. For example, with the area that I oversee within our play development and performance pathways, we have relationships with organisations such as Driveline Baseball, Rapsodo and Blast Motion, who are technological organisations and data organisations in the United States that complement what our training programs look like here in Australia, and they're resources that are only available for the sheer fact that baseball is so large internationally.
Just following on from that, of course, Major League Baseball in America and their anti-doping policy there compared to what Australian baseball is subjected to under the guidelines, there's a massive difference. And I guess when you've got Major League Baseballers coming from America playing in Australia, how do you deal with something like that and the difference that there is currently between America and Australia on this?
Yeah, it is very different. It has gotten a lot better in recent years in the way in which anti-doping practices are addressed within professional baseball in the United States. The biggest catalyst for compliance and appropriate behaviours in America is based around, the sheer financial losses of players being suspended if they do return positive results. For example, the first offence is a mandatory 50-game suspension. Second offence is a 100-game suspension. The third offence is life. But if you're earning $20, $25 million a year, a 50-game suspension is in the magnitude of millions of dollars of equivalent of a fine for that player. Now, it's not the 4 years that you would get under the WADA code, which we're compliant with, but it's certainly a lot better than what it was 15, 20 years ago, where it was basically a slap on the wrist for those kinds of behaviours. For players coming out to Australia, we have an agreement with Major League Baseball and the Major League Baseball Players Association, which is a very powerful athlete union. The players do have to abide by the WADA code, which we're required to for the Australian Baseball League, and players are subject to the requirements and sanctions set out within that code whenever they're playing here. So basically, if you're playing in Australia, you're playing under our rules, and we make zero exceptions for that.
What about the integrity factors of sports betting, match manipulation, match fixing? Is that a real issue at the moment for baseball, given that you have a huge Asian component? We know that Asia is very big when it comes to sports betting.
Yeah, it is a significant risk for us, and it's one we watch very closely. It's probably the one element which I work most closely with Sports Integrity Australia on at this time of year as we're moving into our Australian Baseball League season, which historically kicks off in November. And that is primarily due to the fact now that sports betting and betting on baseball is now legal in the United States. Up until last year, that was not the case. So we didn't have any markets that could, any legal markets that were really influencing outcomes from the United States. Whereas we know that there's a huge betting culture out through Asia, and through our work with Sports Integrity Australia and via Sports Radar, we're able to keep pretty close tabs on what that betting market looks like. And it has increased exponentially over the last 2 years, in particular with Geelong Korea being in the Australian Baseball League. And we do a lot of checks and balances behind the scenes to ensure that, or to our best of our knowledge, that the players coming out and playing in our leagues here have gone through an appropriate vetting process where we can minimise the risk that their performance have been influenced.
Yes, there is enormous interest, isn't there, in Australian baseball in Asia, given the Geelong Korea experiment, which has been highly successful.
Yeah, look, we've gone from basically being a domestic league with a little bit of reach into North America up into 2018 to a scenario where for Geelong Korea alone, we had 20 million viewers of their games each of the last 2 years. We're looking at a number of, TV distribution arrangements with our games to get that spread even further through Asia and through North America. And it's predominantly centred around the interests that Geelong Korea has created, as well as Auckland, which came into the league at the same time as Geelong Korea for the 2019 season.
You mentioned a moment ago you are the General Manager, Performance Pathways and Player Development. One of the unique factors in baseball, there are a number of unique factors, but one is the recruitment of very young players from Australia into major leagues such as America. And I guess there is a fair bit of management involved there because you're getting young players being offered huge amounts of money.
It is tricky, and it's one of the areas that we're actually trying to grapple with right now, and what's the right path for talented young players. Would be foolish to think that a talented young player is going to turn down significant sums of money that are on offer to them and their family for taking up some of these opportunities at a young age. But when we assess our young talented players, we don't just assess their ability to perform on the field. We also assess their personal characteristics in terms of their preparedness to be able to cope with the environments they're going into within these deals that they're having with professional clubs. Are there avenues to ensure that There is funding for higher education when their professional career is done. So for argument's sake, we can put in place, or the families can put in place caveats where there is some money that's reserved or additional money put into their contracts to pay for the university tuition at the end of their career. We can also negotiate outcomes such as they don't depart Australia to go into those environments until they've finished high school. So I guess there's a number of steps that we can put in place to try and protect the player as a person, as well as balancing the fact that these are young players. They're not seniors yet. They're not elite performers yet. They're developing players, and managing the workloads and expectations for these young players is really, really critical to make sure that they get the most out of their opportunity when they do finally get over to the United States, as opposed to sending them over as a 16-year-old with no support mechanisms, no safety nets for them, and basically leaving them to the wolves, so to speak, to try and survive in what is incredibly cutthroat world of professional sport.
How do you see baseball evolving in years to come? You mentioned there, obviously, the young players going overseas, the importance of player development, but how do you see your sport developing and evolving here in Australia?
Yeah, I see two very clear changes that will be occurring in the short to medium term. One is that the technological advancement of player assessment has increased remarkably over the last 5 years. Through the support of Sports Australia, we've been able to, in inverted commas, tech up over the last 6 months, and we're in as good a position as anyone in the world now to appropriately develop these talented young players in Australia for better outcomes down the track. But that gets dovetailed against some of the real challenges that we're seeing in North America right now, some caused by COVID, some others caused by some restructuring of professional baseball, where it appears that there's going to be a significant cut in the number of teams within the minor league baseball system, which feeds into Major League Baseball. So there's going to be less places for our players in the future. But what that does is that really opens up the doors for opportunities for our players to go through the college system. And we now have a dedicated resource on board in a gentleman named Andrew Riddell, whose entire focus is around transitioning players into and out of US environments, whether it's professional or college. And building the relationship with colleges in particular to create better opportunities for our kids, in particular if this minor league retraction of teams does occur in the future. Yes, it represents a massive opportunity for young baseballers here in Australia, not only to go to America and play, but also to study as well. Michael, thanks very much for joining us on Onside today and for providing a great insight into what is occurring in baseball at the moment. A pleasure. Thank you very much.
And now for our segment From Left Field, where we answer a question from the public.
Hi, I'm Bron Knox, triple Olympian, water polo player and clean sport educator with Sport Integrity Australia. The question I have from Left Field today is, if one person in the team returns a positive test, does the whole team get tested? My answer to this question would be it would depend on the circumstances relating to the doping activity, including what the sport was and whether or not there was information suggesting complicity. If there is information around a positive test, that suggests that more than one athlete may be doping. Further testing and investigations may occur. In some sports, if a person tests positive, then the whole team's results are disqualified. So it's important to understand that your choices could affect your entire team.
Well, thanks for listening to Onside. If you'd like more information, simply head to the Sport Integrity Australia website for more details. And we have a lot more exciting guests and topics coming up in future episodes, so don't forget to follow and subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening from. We appreciate the support. Thanks for listening. I'm Tim Gable.
You've been listening to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia. Send in your podcast questions or suggestions to media@sportintegrity.gov.au. For more information on Sport Integrity Australia, please visit our website www.sportintegrity.gov.au or check out our Clean Sport app.